Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on today's live chat. My name is Lakelyn Hogan. I'm Gerontologist and Caregiver Advocate at Home Instead Senior Care. And again, I just want to thank you so much for tuning in today to our live chat. These live chats are brought to you by Home Instead Senior Care, a network of locally owned franchise offices. The Home Instead Senior Care Network offers in-home care with an individualized approach to help keep your loved one safe and independent at home. And to learn more, you can visit homeinstead.com. And before we get started, I wanted to just go over a few housekeeping items. All right, so first and foremost, we've muted all of our lines, all of your lines, pardon me, to just reduce any background noise. So we want you to be able to move about your house. If the doorbell rings or the dog barks, don't worry, we can't hear it on our end. Feel free to do the laundry or, get up and move. Again, we're muting all of your lines. But this is a live chat where we're taking questions, and this month's topic is Ask Us Anything. So typically each month we have kind of a set topic, but this month we thought it's the end of the year, we're just going to open it up for any and all questions related to caregiving, Alzheimer's, dementia. So at any point you can chat your questions in. There's a question box at the bottom of your screen. So you just type in your question there. There's no such thing as a silly question. Any question that caregivers ask in this community is helpful to everyone. So please, again, feel free to type in those questions at any time. If you prefer to submit your question anonymously, you have the option to do so before you hit send. And then we're also recording today's webinar. So we will send a link to you at the end of the webinar within the next 24 hours. We'll send it to your email, the one you used to register for today's live chat. And that way you can forward it on to a family member or friend, another fellow caregiver that you might think would benefit, or you can go back and listen to it again. You don't have to take notes since we are recording. All of this good information will be captured and you can replay it really at any time. So that's really all the housekeeping notes that I have for us today. But again, thank you so much for joining us for today's live chat. Again, the topic is Ask Us Anything. And I can't believe we are already at December. 2018 has flown by. So I thought in the spirit of, end of year and reflecting, we'd look back on all the chats that we have had this year. And the great thing about these chats is we do record them and you can listen to all of them at our helpforalzheimersfamilies.com site. So on there, there's a tab at the top and you can find the live recording. We're going to give you the exact link at the end of the webinar again. So if any of these topics speak to you, if you want to go back and listen to any of our past chats, feel free to do so. But in January of this last year, we talked about preparing for the long haul. We had expert Ann Tomlinson, and one of my favorite takeaways from her chat was sometimes caregivers need to think of themselves as the CEO in the caregiving situation. Every situation, most of the time, caregivers have limited time, resources, and funds, and you can't really do everything alone. You need to prioritize, decide what's really important for the loved one you're caring for. You also need to reach out and ask for help. So if you want to learn more about Ann Tomlinson and what she's doing in her work, she has a great caregiving group called Daughterhood Circles. It's a caregiving support network. You can go back and listen to that live chat. And then in February, we talked about frontal temporal degeneration, and Sharon Denny joined us. She works for the Association of Frontal Temporal Degeneration. That organization has great resources, but we talk a lot about Alzheimer's and dementia. We know there are other types of dementia out there, and FTD or frontal temporal dementia is one of those. And what we learned in this chat is often people get this type of dementia at a younger age, and it's not primarily a memory disorder, unlike Alzheimer's. Frontotemporal dementia, FTD, instead impacts a person's personality, language, and behavior, and it's pretty rare when you compare to Alzheimer's. Only 50 to 60,000 people have this disease in the U.S., but there's some unique caregiving challenges. So if you want to learn more about that, you could go back and listen to that recording. And then in March, we talked with expert Susie Favaro about the topic of ambiguous loss and strategies to cope with ambiguous loss. And if you've never heard that term before, when I heard it the first time, a light bulb just went off in my brain. So when we talk about ambiguous loss in relation to dementia caregiving, it can be pretty common. So ambiguous loss is when the physical body is still present, but psychologically they have changed or are absent from how they were at one time. So if you think about Alzheimer's and different types of dementia, the disease in the brain is causing changes in your loved one. So while they're physically there, family caregivers might be grieving the person they used to be. It's very common. And this type of grief is confusing and stressful. So if you find yourself dealing with this ambiguous loss of your loved one, go back and listen to that chat with Susie Favaro in March. It was a great, great live chat. And then in April, we talked with Jennifer Fitzpatrick about tips on socializing for someone living with dementia. She talked about how you don't have to create elaborate activities to do with your loved one to socially engage with them. You just have to think about, what did your loved one used to do? What things did they enjoy? And then do those things together. Find ways that they can still do the types of things they used to enjoy. And even little tasks and activities can be done together and can be quality time spent together. So that was another great topic. And then in May, we had Dr. Julie Masters on. She talked about preparing for final years. We know that dementia is a progressive disease and will eventually, unfortunately, lead to the loss of our loved ones. And so preparing for those final years, talking as early on as possible about end-of-life wishes is so, so important, especially for those with dementia, because we want them to be able to still contribute to the conversation. We want their wishes to be known and carried out. So if you want to learn more about end-of-life for your loved one, preparing for that, you can go back and listen to May's live chat. And then in June, we talked about a different type of dementia, Lewy body dementia, with expert Angela Taylor of she's with the Lewy Body Dementia Association, LBDA, a great organization. But she talked about how Lewy body dementia is the second most common form of dementia, and the impacts are in the brain are similar to that of Parkinson's disease. So oftentimes, individuals with Parkinson's also have Lewy body dementia. But she also talked about how memory is not always impacted, but other areas of cognition tend to be impacted, such as a person's ability to plan, problem solve. They might have issues with speech and conversation. And they might have a shortened attention span. So again, the Lewy Body Dementia Association has great resources, and that was probably one of our most popular chats of the year. So if you want to go back and listen to June's live chat, please do so. And then in July, we had Michael Ellenbogen back on. He's an individual living with dementia. He talked about his diagnosis journey. When we had him on in 2017, he talked to us about how he had been living with Alzheimer's disease for just shy of 10 years. But this year, he was able to get a PET scan through a clinical trial that he participated in, and they realized that he doesn't have the normal signs of Alzheimer's disease in his brain, so they've changed his diagnosis to a different type of dementia. So if you want to learn more about his diagnosis journey, please listen to that July chat. It was really interesting. And he also talks about his advocacy work and his clinical trial participation. And then in August, we had Molly Carpenter on. She talked about person-centered Alzheimer's care. We talked a lot about how that person living with dementia really truly needs to be at the center of care. We need to focus on his or her needs. And then she and I talked through the Alzheimer's Association's new dementia care practice recommendations that they just came out with. So if you're interested in re-listening to that chat, please do so. August was a great chat all about person-centered care. And then in September, we kind of shook things up a little bit and focused more on the caregiver. We had Lynn Poslins from Women's Brain Health Initiative on. She talked about brain health tips for women caregivers specifically, and she talked about how caregivers really need to take care of their own brain health. And You can do that by eating well-balanced diets, engaging in exercise, socialization, stimulating our brain in various ways. And those are things we can do as family caregivers to reduce the risk of us getting Alzheimer's or dementia at a later date. So the Women's Brain Health Initiative site has great resources for family caregivers on how to improve their own brain health. So you can check that out for more information. And then in October, we had Meryl Comer. She talked about her personal journey with Alzheimer's. She's a caregiver for her husband, who has had Alzheimer's for over 20 years, and also her mother. So she cares for them both at home. She also wrote a beautiful book about her Alzheimer's caregiving journey with her husband. It's called Slow Dancing with a Stranger. But Meryl and I had a great discussion about her journey, her advocacy work, and practical tips for caregiving. So please go back and listen to that if you didn't get a chance. Meryl is a fantastic speaker. I see her at a lot of conferences in the Alzheimer's space. She just is a great advocate for the cause. And then last month, we were joined by David Troxel, and we talked about caregiving for the holidays. Since we are in the thick of the holiday season, David was on to remind us that it's important to still keep those holiday traditions alive, but we need to make modifications for our loved ones living with Alzheimer's and dementia so that they can still engage, but we need to kind of meet them where they are. And we actually are going to have a Facebook Live about holiday caregiving on Friday of this week. So if you missed that chat, you can go back and listen to the recording of David and I chatting, or you can join me on our Remember for Alzheimer's Facebook page this Friday at noon Central Time. We're going to be taking caregiver questions about the holidays live. So that was a full year of chats, and we're going to wrap up the year with today's chat. Again, the topic is Ask Us Anything, and we're so excited to have back our guest expert, Molly Carpenter. She's the author of Confidence to Care, a resource for family caregivers providing Alzheimer's disease or other dementia care at home. And she's also a speaker, trainer, and family caregiver. In her current role as Director of Business and Academic Research at Home Instead Senior Care, Molly works with a team responsible for ensuring that Home Instead Senior Care's network of caregivers worldwide have resources necessary to effectively provide quality care in the home and understand their important work enhancing the lives of those that they serve. So with that, I want to welcome you, Molly. Thank you so much for coming back and joining us today for our topic, Ask Us Anything.
Thank you for having me, Lakelyn, and thank you for that warm welcome. I'm so thrilled to be here, and I love this topic of Ask Anything because I think sometimes there's as even when we have our monthly chats and there's different topics, a different question unrelated pops up, and so this is a great opportunity for people to really ask us anything about this disease and this process and caregiving and anything that we can answer to help.
Well, we are so thrilled to have you back. And I also like this topic too, because so often we have, these set topics each month, but really caregivers have questions on a whole variety of topics. And so just to open up this forum and let it be a time for us to just answer questions that come up and is going to be great. I'm really looking forward to this next 45 minutes or so that we have left in the hour. So if you're out there listening today on our live chat, we truly are taking questions on anything related to Alzheimer's, dementia, caregiving. So please, again, feel free to chat those in at any time. There's a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And we had quite a few questions come in during the promotion of this live chat through our live chat inbox. So we have a couple of those that are going to get us started. But again, if you have questions, please feel free to chat those in again at any time. All right, so Molly, are you ready for a couple questions?
Yes, let's do this.
All righty. Okay, so Beth wrote in via email earlier this week, and she says that she lives in a rural community with few resources for individuals living at home with Alzheimer's and for their family caregivers. She says that her spouse has difficulties out in public places, such as restaurants, churches, grocery stores, and so forth. He has teased others by pulling hair, tipping off hats, squeezing cheeks, and those sorts of things. And while they're all playful attempts at teasing, they're not always appreciated by people who don't know, or parents of little children often get upset. And in this day and age, he could really be misinterpreted as an aggressor, even living in a small town. So she's really resorted to staying home alone with him, which can be so isolating, as we know. So she's asking, do you have any tips for me on managing going out and about in public with my husband who has Alzheimer's? So, wow, this is a tough one right out of the gate, Molly, but I think we can tackle it. Do you have any initial thoughts for Beth?
Yes, I do. Beth, thank you for sending that in, first of all. Boy, living in a rural community and a small rural community at that there are limited resources. So you're probably on a little bit of a tougher journey than others that might have access to different resources. But I think a couple things initially come to mind. First, I definitely, as Lakelyn said, it can be isolating if you just stay home, and so we definitely don't want you to do that. I think what happens a lot of times when somebody has Alzheimer's or dementia, we know that they're not processing like we're processing. They're not able to think of the right word, the right sentence. They may feel like they know where they are, but not exactly. Like this restaurant looks familiar, but I don't know the name of it. Some things like that. And so when somebody with Alzheimer's or dementia is experiencing that, they get a little nervous. And so to me, it sounds like his way of sort of coping with that is to do things like tipping hats and squeezing cheeks and things like that, because he's just trying to be relevant or find a way to connect and still feel like he's part of the community, so to speak. And Beth, I'm sure that you might be feeling uncomfortable, probably because he's doing some of those things, but you may also just feel uncomfortable in general as well, because as we all know, this is a very unpredictable disease, and you don't really know what's going to happen each time you leave the house. So if you're having any feelings of anxiety or nervousness or just uneasy, he can feel that. And in turn, that might be one of the reasons that he's sort of, again, doing some of these things. But the majority reason why he does those things is probably, again, because he's trying to feel connected and relevant into the community. So I always like to give a little background to maybe why some of these things are happening. And gosh, being in a small town, and even in this day and age, you're right, it can be misinterpreted by people. They may not understand it. So I think there's a couple things that we could talk through, and I know Lakelyn's probably got some ideas as well, but one thing that comes to mind right off the bat is to really think about where you're going and when you're going places. So, if you like to go for walks and maybe you pass a school or a playground or something, maybe try to avoid the lunch hour when that could be a recess. Try to go at an odd time during the day when maybe a bunch of kids won't be around, because that could be, again, so many people around, lots of kids running around screaming, having a blast. That might cause him to want to, connect with them, and he might reach out and, try to pat him on the head or give him a hug or whatever he might do. So that's one thing. And then the sheer number of people that might be around. So going into a Starbucks or a coffee shop at between 7 and 8 in the morning, there's probably 20 people in the coffee shop, but maybe at 9 or 10, there might only be a few. So we strongly discourage you from just staying home alone, but finding opportunities where you can kind of control the crowd, control the noise a little bit, and control the familiarity of what's happening around you. So those are just some things right off the top of the head. Lakelyn, what do you think as far as some other ideas?
Molly, I think you gave some great suggestions to Beth. I would also just add a couple things that I've heard other caregivers try and have some success with. I know one family caregiver, she made up some business cards that said something to the effect of, thank you for your understanding. My husband has Alzheimer's disease, and in certain situations when her husband was maybe acting out or saying something that didn't really make sense, she would just, slip that card to the individual she was interacting with, and it kind of put that person at ease. It kind of explained the situation without having to say it out loud and embarrass her husband or and make kind of a scene around her. So she found that to be helpful at times. And then, yeah, and depending on where you're at or what you're doing, I know Beth had mentioned at church. If you're sitting in a church service, perhaps your husband really enjoys a certain activity that's quiet. Maybe you bring that activity along. Maybe it's a little rummage box or something to kind of keep his hands busy while you're able to sit and still enjoy that religious service. We know that caregivers often draw their strength from their faith, so that's really important. And Beth, if it does get to a point when you feel like you can't get your husband out of the house any longer, but you still need to get out and about, you could look into, maybe having a relative, family member come over. Perhaps your faith community has some sort of volunteer program that you can look into so that you can still get out and about even if your husband is unable to. So those are just a couple additional tips I would add to Molly's, but we hope that you find that to be helpful, Beth. Anything else to add?
Yeah, I do want to add one little thing to your note about, you made a great point about bringing something to sort of occupy him during the church service, for example, and that is a great suggestion. A lot of people may enjoy even just like puzzle pieces or anything that's textured or a book that he likes, maybe that he can page through. I mean, something like that. That is a great tip, and one that people sometimes forget about. So it's really a great idea to sort of think about that when you're going into those kind of church services where you can't really change the time, like I suggested before. So that's a great one. Very good.
All right. Thank you so much, Beth, for writing in with that question. And again, if you've just recently joined us, we are taking your questions live. So please don't hesitate at any time. Please type in your questions. We would love to hear from you. The topic is literally ask us anything. So we're taking all questions related to Alzheimer's, dementia, family caregiving. All questions are up for discussion today. There's no such thing as a silly question. So please, again, feel free to chat your question in. There's a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get your questions live and answer them. So please type those in at any time. We have a question from Peggy. She says, could you talk about dementia, should you talk about dementia in front of your parent that has it with others in general conversation? This is a pretty common question that I get asked. I'm sure, Molly, you get asked this as well. Family members struggle with, do I talk about it in front of my loved one? Do I tell other people about it? And this can be really sensitive. But Molly, do you have any initial thoughts on this?
Yes, I think the biggest thing that the way I advise people usually is to do what feels comfortable for you and them. And so what I mean by that is there's no perfect answer to this. There isn't this rule that says you shouldn't talk about it. It's a no-no and it'll upset them. Because some people it doesn't upset. I have a very dear friend who is 78 and has just been diagnosed, and every time I talk to her now, we openly talk about it. And of course, she knows my background, so she has lots of questions. But I think that she's comfortable. I've heard her in a bigger crowd where she's just sort of saying like, "Oh, my memory is not the greatest anymore," and so I sort of take my cues from her. But I think number one, there's no there's no right or wrong answer here. But I do think the goal is dignity, right? And so talking about it, if people hear that word Alzheimer's or dementia and you feel that sort of sense of dread or it's negative or bad, yeah, you may not want to use those words, but saying things in a conversation with, well, memories getting tougher, or, just coming up with some better phrasing, which is going to take a little bit of time to think through. But again, being a caregiver, the preparing ahead of time for these conversations, especially as we head into the holidays, this would be a good kind of exercise of what do you feel comfortable sharing to other people? What would your loved one, how would they react to it, or how would they react to it in the past, and when they've heard that somebody has it, even somebody famous or whatever. So I guess I would say that number one, the goal is dignity, and I think it depends on the person and the family on where we're at with if we're comfortable talking about it or not. And then just being conscious of the words we're choosing and how we're saying it, and again, even your voice tone. I've noticed that with my special friend, she, if I start to get, I don't know, my tone might be patronizing a little bit, or, oh, it's okay, you can still, like she took ukulele lessons this fall, and I said, oh, good for you. And she's like, well, yeah, it's good for me because I wanted to learn something new, not because I have Alzheimer's. And I said, you're exactly right, Sharon, you're exactly right. So I think it's, again, your tone of voice might be impactful in this kind of a situation as well.
Yeah, Molly, I would agree with all of that you just mentioned. We definitely want to maintain the individual's dignity and want to be respectful. And yeah, and so you're right. If families can have those conversations with their loved one prior to a get-together, a gathering, especially around these holiday times, that's going to be most helpful. But there are certain situations, I think, when it's good to talk about it. If you're talking with a healthcare provider, or if you're considering, hiring assistants to come into the home, we definitely want to talk to the individual, not about them, when they're right in the room. So I think family caregivers also need to keep that in mind, that if you're going to talk about it and they're in the room, make sure you're talking to them, not about them to other people around them. I hope that makes sense. But we just really need to, again, it goes back to that dignity and respect of the individual. And we know that there's definitely still a person. This disease, unfortunately, is impacting their brain and their ability sometimes to do things for themselves, but they're still a person. And so I think that, Molly, you made so many great points there, that we need to make sure that they're comfortable with it, and that if they're not, then we need to be respectful of that, and engage in conversation in a way that would make them feel comfortable. So any last thoughts to add there, Molly?
No, I think that's good. I think you made a great point about there's certain times where you have to say the words and talk about it to healthcare professionals. That's a great point as well. But yeah, I really do think this is all about, I loved your idea, like, could you have this conversation, especially going into holiday season, can you have this conversation at home or earlier in the disease of, Mom, as this progresses, how would you like me to handle this with other people, and those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, again, it's sort of a family caregiver putting themselves in the shoes of the person, and how would I want to be talked about, or what would I want my daughter or son to say about me if this were me, kind of a thing. And
Mm-hmm.
the answer becomes pretty clear, and use that as a guiding post, and it'll be just great. It'll be just fine.
Thanks, Molly. All right, we have a question from Janice. She says, being that my father's mom had Alzheimer's and my mother did as well, does that mean I'm prone to get it? That's another common question that we tend to get as being professionals in the field. Is it genetic? Can it be passed down? I just had this conversation the other day with somebody. So, Molly, do you have any initial thoughts on this?
Well, yes, I think there's research on both sides, right? And I don't know if that's what your conversation you had the other day, Lakelyn, was about, but there's research on both sides that does say there is a genetic connection. There's some research that says there isn't. And I think there's a lot of factors in this research that needs to be considered, and things like what age were they when they got it, what type of dementia or Alzheimer's were they diagnosed with. There are certain types that are more hereditary or genetic than others. And again, an early onset, for example, does have a strong genetic, connection, but otherwise, that's where the results on the research is kind of mixed. But the thing about all this, and then Lakelyn, I'll let you chime in on what you've heard as well, is getting a baseline sort of memory or cognitive scoring. There's these very simple tests that most physicians know how to use. They're part of the Medicare wellness exam, but sort of getting a baseline score and getting tested every year will really help you sort of monitor how, if things are progressing or if everything's the same, or what it looks like in the future. Because again, being prepared for this is very, very important. But so there are some things that you can do to sort of monitor if you notice if anything is changing.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up that Medicare wellness visit memory screening that's now available to all those that are Medicare eligible, because that's so important, is to have that baseline. And I think you put it perfectly. The science is a little mixed on, is it genetic? Is it hereditary? Some say yes, some say no. But we do know that the number one risk factor for dementia is age. So the older you get, the higher your risk of dementia is. And we do know that a lot of times if someone in your family has had dementia or Alzheimer's, you're at a higher risk. And we use the word risk because, it's not guaranteed. There's very, very rare strains of genes that if you have it, you kind of have a 50-50 chance, or you are at an even higher risk than the average person. But again, those genes are very, very rare. So, hi, Janice, it sounds like it maybe runs in your family, so you might be at higher risk, but there are ways that everyone can reduce their risk of getting a type of dementia. I mentioned the chat earlier today with Lynn Poslin on women's brain health, and those are tips that apply to males as well. But there are some things that you can be doing, and even as young as your 20s and your 30s, exercising regularly, eating a well-balanced diet. The MIND diet has been shown to help reduce risk. So we know that there's no prevention, but you can reduce your risk by engaging in those types of things. And we also know that cognitive stimulation can help reduce your risk. So I would tell Janice, learn a new language, or like Molly's friend, pick up a new instrument, and just keep your brain mentally stimulated and engaged. And also, I would learn the signs and symptoms of dementia, and maybe ask family, what were mom or dad's early signs. So that way you're becoming educated, and if you do start to notice any changes in your cognition, or you're concerned about it, make sure that your physician knows your family history and gets that baseline for you, so that you can have that open dialogue. If down the road you start to notice some cognitive changes in yourself, then you can kind of stay on top of it. But I think that getting that baseline, as Molly mentioned, is so, so important. Molly, anything else to add to that?
No, that was great. That's great. Really good.
Well, Janice, oh, sorry, go ahead, Molly.
No, just really good tips. Thank you for sharing those
too. You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, thank you, Janice, for that question. We hope that that information was helpful to you. And we still are taking questions live. So if you have any questions, please type them in at any time. We're happy to answer them for you. All right, so we have a question from Charla. She kind of has two questions, so I'm going to start with her first one. But she says, as a little background, her mom has dementia, and from what she's read, she's in kind of the moderate stage, and she's having trouble signing her own name. And her stepdad is the caregiver, and Charla lives out of state but visits a week at a time, at least a couple times a year. So her first question is that her mom is on Medicare and a supplemental insurance. She does have some land that's in a trust, and the land is being rented out, but Charlotte's wondering if her mom has to go into a home or passes away, would the state take the land from her or bill her, take the land from her or take the home away? And so that's a great question. And, Molly, do you want to start with this, or I can kind of just give a few initial thoughts?
Yeah, go ahead, Lakelyn.
Okay, great. So, this is a very complex question, and we do from time to time get questions on the more legal side of the caregiving journey. And there are so many things to take into consideration, especially if there's family land or a home or a large estate involved. But I always encourage families to seek out an elder law attorney. And elder law attorneys are pretty common in most metropolitan areas, even more smaller cities or towns. They often have elder law attorneys because they really specialize in tax law and these complicated estates where there are trusts involved and land. So my suggestion to Charlotte would be to seek out an elder law attorney just to really dig into her mom's situation and to make sure that you have the right documents in place. I know earlier this year we talked to Dr. Julie Masters about planning ahead for end of life, and there's, wills and power of attorneys that need to be put into place in order to have a family caregiver sign on behalf of their loved one. So, Charlotte, it sounds like your mom is starting to have trouble signing her name. So if those documents aren't in place now, they're going to be even harder to get in place, even a couple months down the road. So encourage all of you out there, if you haven't talked with your loved one about end-of-life issues, if you haven't gotten those important documents in place, then you should really get together with your family and maybe call a family meeting and talk about, do we need to hire an elder law attorney, or can we kind of print off some forms online and get those filled out, because those become really, really important, especially as your loved one can no longer sign their own name or make decisions on their own behalf. So, Molly, would you have anything else to answer or add to that question?
Yes, I think you answered it very well, and I think that that's exactly what I would say too, was to contact a local attorney to sort of help you through all of this. I think so, because the one thing that we probably don't know or understand is, whose trust the name is in, and is it hers or is somebody else monitoring the trust? Because usually that's how trusts are set up. There's multiple people involved, and that can decide how, make the decisions for it. So absolutely, that's the best advice, is to contact a local attorney, or if you have your own attorney, to sort of start to understand what that piece looks like. And again, I'm so glad you made the point, Lakelyn, around planning ahead and getting these documents into place. Unfortunately, Lakelyn and I have seen too many times where these documents and wills and all of these things, that power of attorney, all these things are not in place. And it's very, very difficult then to handle some even healthcare issues, but land and inheritance and dollars and houses and all of those things. So it's just so important to do that. And, it's hard. It's a hard conversation to have. It's a hard thing to think about, and none of us want to think about it. But, we've got to start to think proactively that, these are real conversations that need to be had to just make things easier in the end. So I can't encourage you all enough to take that time, as Lakelyn suggested, to really get some of these documents in order and really get an understanding on it. And I'm telling you what, we have read some research. I've read some research recently and met a professor out of Rochester, New York, who has done some research on people that plan to care or are planning for this end of life things and these big, wills and powers of attorneys and things, and people that make a plan and have a plan live a better quality of life. So if I can give you another reason to do it, I would say that there is research out there that says once you have those documents and a plan in place and you've thought it through and had the conversation, you're going to live a lot better and you're going to age a lot better and you're going to, just feel better knowing you've got that plan in place. So
thank you for adding that, Molly. Yeah, that's a really interesting study. Now I'm curious. You're going to have to send that over to me. I want to read more.
I definitely will. Yes.
All right. Well, Charlotte had a second question that kind of dovetails off of her situation that I mentioned earlier. So she also asked, when or how do you know if my mom needs to go into a home? When will I know? Or how do you know you're providing the best care for your loved one? Which they're kind of two separate questions. But Molly, do you want to take the signs that your loved one might be needing
Sure.
to move to a care facility? I know that's a really hard decision that so many family caregivers have to make from time to time.
Sure, absolutely. It is. And it is it's a unique situation too, because there's different signs for different people. And even, Charla's situation is different. She doesn't live there. So Charla, your timing could be sooner than others because you don't live nearby. Whereas if you did live closer, perhaps you could monitor a little bit differently. But the other thing is it just sort of depends on, I always think that the family caregiver defaults to safety as signs of when things need to change. So safety can mean a lot of different things. It could mean there's been a fall. It could mean there's been a little car accident or a little, fender bender or something different with the car. It could mean that the house, the basement stairs, like for my grandmother, for example, were the scariest, deepest, shortest stairs on the planet, and we were terrified that she was going to fall down the stairs every time she went to do laundry. Now, so it just kind of depends on the family caregiver, like I said, usually defaults to safety issues. And so I think everybody has to think about that differently. Moving into a facility or not is a very big decision in its own right. So, for example, if it's a safety issue within the home, is there an opportunity for a professional caregiver to come in and sort of monitor things or, sort of ease that concern that you might be having from a distance, to make kind of monitoring things a little bit closer and making sure, that's one option before moving straight into the facility type of a plan. So I think a lot of things, especially being a long distance caregiver, a couple of signs that people see are like expired or not enough food in the fridge, which I know she does have a spouse living with her, so that probably isn't a big issue. Her appearance, is she usually very put together and maybe isn't looking as put together as usual, or does the yard look overgrown, or a stair that's broken, something, there's just lots of signs to look for to know if something's changed in the situation, and then determining, is this a big enough change where we have to make a move or get extra support, like I said, from a professional caregiver, or moving to a facility type of a thing. Lakelyn, what else would you say as far as signs or what people need to think about?
You made so many great points, and you're right. Just noticing those changes and trying to find ways to modify the living environment to make it a safer place, or bringing in home care to try to see if that solution will work, or maybe the family gets together and creates kind of a schedule so the individual is never home alone, but yet the primary caregiver gets some time off. Those sorts of solutions are always good to try, because we know that individuals living with dementia, they're familiar with their home surrounding. There's a gentleman that we work with here at home instead, Molly, and I know you've heard probably this story before, but their dad had dementia, but he could still pour himself a bowl of cereal because he knew where the cereal was and the jug of milk was. It's been there for the same spot for 40 years, so he could still live pretty independently in his home environment because he was familiar with it. So, but we do know that sometimes the individual's care goes beyond what the family can provide at home, and that move does need to happen. But if you feel like your loved one can't live safe at home, you also shouldn't feel guilty about moving your loved one, because I know family caregivers also sometimes experience guilt in that decision making. But I think in regards to Charlotte's second question, how do you know if you're providing the best care for him or her? That's an also very situational question, but sometimes it's helpful to kind of take a step back and, assess your loved one's needs, see if in your mind if they're being met, if you need to bring in additional assistance, or maybe you're burnt out as a caregiver and you just need some time away from the caregiving situation. Are there respite services in your area? Can you hire a home care company like Home Instead, or perhaps your faith community has a volunteer program, or your neighbor or family member can come over and provide that respite again, so that you can get out, recharge, and come back and continue to provide the best care that you possibly can for your loved one. But it is sometimes hard because it can be so situational. We have this great app through our Help for Alzheimer's Families website, and we'll share that with you on the resource page here in just a few minutes. And that app has you can download it for free to your smartphone, and there's so many great tips right on that app. So, if you are home providing care and you're struggling with a certain situation, you're wondering, my loved one has been wandering, I really don't know what to do. You can type in the keyword wander, and some tips will come up. So making sure that you have all of the information and resources right at your fingertips can also help you to continue to care for your loved one at home. So Molly, did you have anything to add to that second question of Charlotte's? How do you know when you're providing the best care for your loved one?
Yes, I think you gave excellent tips, and I want to piggyback on the respite comment for 1 minute here too. I think a lot of times your suggestions of a neighbor or a church member or somebody in your community to even provide an hour or two, people want to help, and giving them some opportunity to help you out would make them happy as well. And it doesn't have to be like you have to come do caregiving and give my dad a bath. No, come sit with him for an hour and have a cup of coffee and read the newspaper. Or he loves to watch Wheel of Fortune. Can you come over at 6 o'clock and make him have a dinner with him and then watch Wheel of Fortune while I run an errand if you give people a short amount of time or a little bit of time and an activity to go along with it, you'll be surprised how much help people are willing to do, and as they get more and more comfortable, you can kind of extend that. So I just want to make that comment about respite. But the other thing I want to say is how do you know you're providing the best care for them? Lakelyn, you kind of touched on this, and I think this is a point I would just want to make a little stronger is I think you have to think about what their desired lifestyle is or was, or what their needs are is very important, as you mentioned, Lakelyn. So if your mom or dad, what did their typical day look like? And what did they do in a month's time? What were some of the activities they did? And what made them very, very happy? And I would say if of even half the time or most of the time, those things are occurring, then I would say you're doing a darn good job providing the best care for them that you can, because you're trying to still keep their life as relevant and as normal, or you know, what their normal used to be, as possible. And I think that they would think they're still living that great of a life. So even if it's things like your mom was a stay-at-home mom her whole life and cared for the family, and so now she has dementia or Alzheimer's, but she's still able to fold the laundry and help get dinner started, or even just be in the kitchen talking about recipes or helping set the table, whatever it may be, that's what she used to do, and she's still feeling great about that. So then I would say you're providing the best care that you can for them. So I just would think about it from that perspective, as Lakelyn mentioned, thinking about their needs, and if their needs are met and they're living the life that they used to live for the most part, as much as they possibly can, then you're doing an excellent job. I think a lot of times our family caregivers, they get really hard on themselves. Like, oh, my dad used to, you know, travel to Africa and back once a year. Okay, well, probably can't do that anymore, but is he watching the documentaries on wildlife, and is he looking at his pictures, and is he, you know, talking to people about this? Or I don't know, you know, there's just things that I think family caregivers are so hard on themselves, and they feel so guilty, as you mentioned, Lakelyn, that, you know, it's just step back and think about it from the perspective of, are they still living what they consider a great life? And then I think you're providing great care.
I'm so glad that you added that, Molly. That's so true. And I mean, as family caregivers, that's why it's really important, I think, also to be engaged in these types of communities where you're reaching out to other caregivers, so you know you're not alone in some of these challenging situations. You know that other caregivers are out there asking the same question: am I providing the right care for my mom? Is it the best? So engaging in support groups or tuning into live chats like this can also be really, really helpful for family caregivers just in navigating this whole caregiving journey, because it can be really overwhelming from time to time. I'll go ahead and just flip to the resource slide. So we have quite a few resources that we've been mentioning. Our helpforalzheimersfamilies.com website, that's where you can download that free app that I was talking about. And you can also access all of the past recorded live chats. You can see the more long drawn out URL there. I apologize for that, but we wanted to make sure you knew exactly where past chats are. We also have a Remember for Alzheimer's Facebook group that's really active. Talk about a caregiving community. That's one of our strong ones. Remember for Alzheimer's, you can just search for that on Facebook and connect with us there. If you want to read the book that Molly wrote, Confidence to Care, you can go to confidencetocare.com and learn more. We also have a website for all caregivers, whether you're caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's and dementia or not, and that's caregiverstress.com. And then at homeinstead.com, if you're considering respite services, we actually also had a question come in. An individual just asked, you know, I'm retired. I'd really like to care for an elderly person or a couple in their home. Homeinstead.com, you can apply to be a caregiver. You can go into the home and provide that care. So if you go to homeinstead.com and click the careers tab, you have the opportunity to apply there. We have offices all over the U.S., but you could also look into your local area agency on aging to see if they have a program. You can also look to your faith community to see if they have a volunteer program. If you don't necessarily want to get paid to work with older people, but you want to volunteer your time, there should be organizations in your community where you can do that too. So that's a great question, and I love that this individual has the heart to serve others and wants to give back in that way. So hopefully those were some helpful tips. But we do have time for a couple more questions. So if you are out there listening, you have one last dying question that you want to ask us, please chat them in at any time. Oh, and then I forgot to mention that last website. The Alzheimer's Association has so many great resources at alz.org. You can find support groups there. You can also get information on Alzheimer's and dementia. There's even more tips on their website in regards to signs to look for, not only when you think your loved one might have dementia, but also in regards to knowing whether or not your loved one would need to move to a care facility, those types of things. So great resources on that site. All right, so we have a time for a couple more questions. Molly, have you had any recent questions that family caregivers have been asking you? I know you interact quite frequently with family caregivers, and so it's always good to know, what are some of the hot topics in the caregiving field right now?
Yes, one that I've gotten, and it's interesting because this does seem to happen around the holidays. So a lot of times families get together around the holidays, right? And maybe they don't live close by, or maybe they, I don't know, have interacted with other family members, and the other family members haven't been around as much. I think about my extended aunts and uncles, and so a lot of times I get calls this time of year, and I get asked of, I've noticed some things have changed, things are progressing a little bit, and it's time to take another step. The recent question was around a person who has some dementia and has been seeing his general practitioner doctor, but now things have gotten a little progressed worse, and so want to make the switch to a geriatrician who specializes in helping people with aging issues and things like Alzheimer's disease. And so this family member made an appointment with the clinic, and now the question is, how do I get him there? And I know you probably have that question a lot, Lakelyn, as well, is how do you get somebody, they've been going to a doctor for a while, many years, in some cases, and now you want me to go to a different doctor, and why? And I don't want to go to the doctor. I don't need to go to the doctor. I'm fine. You know all the excuses. So I've gotten a lot of those lately, and I'll start by just giving one of the things that I've said, and then let you chime in as well, Lakelyn. But I think one of the messages that I've been giving is involving other family members that maybe have a different approach, because sometimes that main family caregiver it is going to be difficult. So involving children or brothers and sisters, or somebody that can sort of reason a little bit better, or mention like, hey, let's just get things checked out. But I think the other message that I've given is that that it's really important to sort of to say things like to reassure the person, we just want to rule everything out, or this isn't normal, and so let's just have it checked out, so we can just have a peaceful year. I mean, those are some of the messages of, I think people get fearful about going to doctors because they think they're going to find something. And really, if we reframe it to say, no, we're just going to ensure everything's fine. We're just going to do the testing so we know that things are okay, or that we know what to do next, or we know how to handle the situation. So it's a super difficult conversation, and Lakelyn, I don't know if you've got other tips that you've given to families off the top of your head on this one.
I think you mentioned, some really great ones. Yeah, sometimes it's the approach that you take. Sometimes it's getting different family members involved. So in some families, if one child has a medical background, sometimes the family either listens to them kind of as the authority, or they don't. So you kind of have to read the situation. Every family is a little bit different, but I think you made a great point, Molly. We know that sometimes symptoms of Alzheimer's or dementia could actually be caused by something else that's very much curable. So we want to make sure that our loved ones are getting that medical attention in case it is something other than Alzheimer's or dementia. And we also know that, if it is, some type of dementia, that advanced planning, that planning in advance is so important. That needs to happen sooner rather than later. So you're right, Molly, it's such a hard conversation to have, but such a necessary one. So I feel for families in that situation, and hope that these tips have been helpful. And before, we just have a couple more minutes left. Molly, did you have anything else to add to that?
No, I think, yeah, again, I think you've reiterated exactly that it's just trying different people out and knowing that maybe the first person, like you said, even the person with medical background may not be the right person, but sometimes that is the right person, but you may have to try a couple different times, and this, it
Yeah,
may take a couple different conversations. Yep, that's a good point.
that's a great point too, Molly. Well, I'm just going to show the next live chat information. We want you to join us again in 2019. We will be continuing these live chats. And on January 22nd, we're going to be talking with Brooks Kenny from Women Against Alzheimer's. And she's going to be talking to us about healthy habits for family caregivers. We're kind of kicking off the year. It's always a time to set New Year's resolutions, and everyone is back at the gym at the first of the year. So we want to talk about healthy habits for family caregivers that we can carry on through the rest of the year. And Women Against Alzheimer's, they have recently come out with a new Be Brain Powerful campaign, and they're going to share that with us. It's a really neat campaign all about strengthening your brain and keeping it healthy, again, to reduce our risk of Alzheimer's and dementia. So we hope that you will join us on January 22nd. And Molly, I want to thank you so much for tuning in today with me, answering all of these questions. I know it was kind of overwhelming to take on any and all questions, but you handled it so well, and I'm so glad that you were able to be our guest expert for today's chat.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, everyone. Well, that ends this month's live chat. We're wrapping up 2018. I wish you all a very happy holiday season. We know as family caregivers, this can be especially a hectic time for all of you. So I hope that you take time to cherish family memories, make new traditions, celebrate old ones, and most importantly, take care of yourself as you continue to care for your loved one with Alzheimer's and other dementias. So with that, we'll say goodbye to you, and we'll see you back in January. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.